When the ice-cold orange juice hit my face, I realized the man before me was no longer my little boy. He smirked at 30 cameras recording our humiliation. He had no clue that his penthouse and the black card he waved around were all in my name. I did not scream. I simply opened my laptop, signed a few transfer orders, and vanished with every single cent he thought he owned. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I am 57 years old, a widow, and to the glittering crowd currently trashing my living room, I am nothing more than a stain on the pristine aesthetic of this downtown Los Angeles penthouse. My son, Lucas Hayes, the 35-year-old self-proclaimed visionary behind a tech investment fund, stood in the center of the room. He held a flute of vintage champagne, basking in the adoration of people who loved his money more than they would ever love him. It was a Sunday brunch, or what Lucas called a networking event. The bass from the DJ booth thumped against my chest, syncing uncomfortably with my own erratic heartbeat. I adjusted the tray of smoked salmon and artisanal crackers in my hands. My dress was old, a grey polyester thing I had bought at a discount store 5 years ago. It clashed horribly with the Italian marble floors and the abstract art hanging on the walls. No one offered to help me. They just reached out, took a canapé, and looked right through me as if I were a piece of furniture that had seen better days. "I built this from nothing," Lucas announced, his voice booming over the music. He gestured expansively, nearly knocking over a vase that cost more than my first car. My mother, bless her heart, she did her best. But we were living in a dump before I made my first million. I literally had to drag her out of the slums to give her this life. I froze. The tray trembled in my hands. The slums, we had lived in a modest, clean home. I had paid for his private tutors. I had paid for everything. But I said nothing. I just set the tray down on the glass coffee table and tried to catch his eye. I needed to speak to him. The envelope in my apron pocket felt like lead. It was a bill from the cardiologist. My heart had been skipping beats lately, fluttering like a trapped bird. The tests alone cost $3,000, and my personal account was dry because I had transferred everything to the main trust last month to cover a margin call Lucas did not know about. I slid onto the edge of the white leather sofa next to him. "Lucas," I whispered, leaning in close so the influencers live-streaming nearby would not hear. "I hate to ask, but I need a favor. Just $3,000. It is for a doctor's visit. I will pay you back next month." Lucas stiffened. The smile vanished from his face. He looked at me, then at the camera phone pointed directly at us by a girl with bright pink hair named Harper. Mommy issues. So cute. Harper giggled, zooming in. "Is she asking for allowance?" Laughter rippled through the room. It was sharp and cruel. Lucas turned a shade of crimson. I saw the shame in his eyes. Not shame for how they treated me, but shame that I existed in his frame. "Seriously," Lucas hissed. He reached for his glass, but instead of the champagne, he grabbed a tumbler of fresh orange juice. "You are doing this now in front of everyone. Lucas, please. I am sick," I murmured. He stood up abruptly. The movement was violent. Before I could blink, the cold, acidic liquid splashed across my face. I gasped as the juice stung my eyes and ran down my nose, dripping onto the faded grey polyester of my dress. "If you want money, go get a job," Lucas shouted, his voice cracking with performative rage. "Pay rent like a normal person. Do not sit here and beg me for cash in front of my guests. I am done carrying you." The room went silent. The DJ cut the music. I could feel the sticky liquid mixing with my cheap mascara, running down my cheeks like black tears. I blinked, trying to clear my vision. I saw faces looking at me with a mixture of disgust and pity. No one moved. No one offered a napkin. Some turned away, pretending to check their phones, while others watched with morbid fascination. "That is right," Harper said, clapping her hands slowly. "Healthy boundaries. Babe, you have to cut the cord eventually." "Starting next month," Lucas declared, pointing a wet finger at me. "You pay your share of the market rate for this room, or you get out. It is called fairness. Mum." I sat there for 5 seconds. 5 long seconds where the only sound was the drip of orange juice hitting the leather sofa. My heart, the one that needed the doctor, slowed down into a cold, heavy rhythm. I stood up. I did not wipe my face immediately. I let them see the mess. I let them see the humiliation. I untied my apron and let it drop to the floor. I looked at the art on the walls. I looked at the view of the city skyline. I looked at the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Okay," I said softly. I wiped the pulp from my chin with the back of my hand. Lucas looked triumphant, thinking he had finally taught me a lesson in independence. He had no idea. He looked at the furniture, the view, the life he thought he had built. I looked at it too. And all I could think was one single, freezing thought: "You fool. Every single thing in this room belongs to me, not you." As the sting of the orange juice began to dry on my skin, my mind drifted away from the cold marble of the penthouse. I travelled back 30 years to a place that smelled of diesel fuel and burnt coffee. It was Ohio, and I was not a silent fixture in a millionaire's mansion. I was a waitress with swollen ankles, and Jack Hayes was a truck driver with grease permanently etched into his fingerprints. We started our life together in a rusted mobile home that shook violently whenever the wind blew across the plains. I remembered the nights we spent on the road. We slept in the cabin of his truck to save money on motels, while Jack drove through the endless black nights. I sat in the passenger seat with a flashlight, reading accounting textbooks I had bought for 50 cents at garage sales. I learned to balance ledgers before I learned how to cook a proper roast. I started helping other independent truckers manage their expenses, turning our glove compartment into a mobile office. Then came the accident. It was a rainy Tuesday when a sedan swerved into Jack's lane. He survived, but his leg was shattered. I remember sitting by his hospital bed, watching him struggle to breathe through the pain. "Ellie," he had whispered, gripping my hand so hard his knuckles turned white. I don't think I can drive the long haul anymore. I'm sorry. I failed us." "You hush," I had told him firmly. "We are done driving for others. We are going to build our own fleet." We took every cent of our savings and the insurance payout to start Road River Freight. We did not sleep for the first 2 years. I was the one who negotiated the contracts, my voice steady on the phone while my hands shook with exhaustion. Jack was the heart of the operation, keeping the engines running and the drivers loyal. When Lucas was born, I did not take maternity leave. I sat in our cramped office, nursing him with one arm while I wrote invoices with the other. I hid our profits in a metal box under our bed, terrified that if we spent a single unnecessary dollar, the house of cards would collapse. After a decade of blood and sweat, a major logistics conglomerate offered to buy us out. The number they wrote on the check was so large I had to count the zeros 3 times. We sold Road River Freight and I immediately funneled that wealth into a new entity I named Northbridge Haven Group. It was a shell, a fortress of solitude where I could invest without anyone knowing my name. But life has a cruel sense of timing. Jack died of a sudden heart attack just 6 months later. I was a widow at 40, left with a fortune that felt like ash in my mouth. I moved Lucas and myself to Los Angeles, seeking a fresh start. I ran Northbridge Haven from a home office, quietly buying real estate blocks and funding tech startups. I never gave interviews. I never put my face on a magazine cover. Lucas grew up in a modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. He had no idea we were billionaires. I made him work at a burger joint during high school summers. I made him apply for scholarships. I wanted him to have the hunger I had, the grit his father had. When he landed his job at Apollo Crest Capital, he came home beaming, bragging about how he had beaten out Harvard graduates. "I did it, Mom," he had said, his chest puffed out. Pure skill. They saw my potential. He did not know the truth. He did not know that Apollo Crest was one of the many firms Northbridge Haven had heavily invested in. He did not know that his first 3 successful deals were handed to him because I had made a phone call to the partners. I had whispered from the shadows, ensuring the path was smooth, believing I was helping him build confidence. I thought I was raising a king. I did not realize I was raising a tyrant who would one day splash juice in my face because he forgot where the ground beneath his feet actually came from. The city lights of Los Angeles flickered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, cold shadows across the living room where I sat in darkness. My phone vibrated incessantly on the coffee table, buzzing against the glass like a dying insect. It was Lucas. He had added me to a group chat with his friends, sending messages that were meant to be apologies, but read more like damage control. I did not unlock the screen. I did not read the half-hearted excuses about stress or the pressure of hosting. The sticky residue of orange juice was gone from my skin, scrubbed away in the shower. But the phantom sensation of the cold liquid hitting my face remained, freezing my heart into something solid and unyielding. I stood up and walked to the master bedroom. I pushed aside a generic abstract painting that Lucas claimed was an investment piece and revealed the small wall safe. My fingers punched in the code, a sequence of numbers that corresponded to the date Jack and I bought our first truck. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside lay the reality my son had never bothered to look for. I pulled out the thick leather binder labeled Northbridge Haven Group. Inside were the deeds, the incorporation papers, and the asset lists. I ran my finger down the columns. This penthouse was not owned by Lucas. It was the property of a blind trust I controlled. The Porsche 911 GT3 he parked downstairs. Company property. The controlling stake in Apollo Crest Capital, where he played the role of a genius investor mine. All of it was mine. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It was 2 a.m, but Miles Carter picked up on the second ring. He had been my chief financial officer for over 20 years, the only person who knew that the quiet widow in the background was actually the shark at the top of the food chain. "Eleanor." His voice was rough with sleep. "Is everything all right? Wake up, Miles," I said, my voice steady and devoid of warmth. "We need a video conference. Now." 10 minutes later, his face appeared on my laptop screen. He looked disheveled, wearing a robe, adjusting his glasses. I did not waste time with pleasantries. "Pull up the Hayes personal asset allocation file," I instructed. I heard the clicking of his keyboard. "I have it. What are we looking for?" "We are restructuring," I said. I want a full list of privileges currently extended to Lucas Hayes. Miles hesitated, then began to read. Primary residence in downtown LA, fully subsidized. Secondary vehicle, the Porsche, leased under corporate expenses. The black Amex with the $50,000 monthly limit, and the risk mitigation fund. That was the polite term for the secret bailouts I had authorized whenever Lucas made a bad bet on a startup. Terminate them? I said. All of them. Miles stopped typing. He looked at the camera, his eyes wide. Eleanor, terminate you mean suspend. I mean terminate. I corrected him sharply. Freeze every account where he is the named beneficiary. Send a repossession order for the vehicle. Mark it as a recall for corporate inventory. And the credit cards, cancel them effective immediately. Flag them for suspicious activity if you have to. He will be stranded, Miles said softly. Eleanor, this will ruin his credit score. It will humiliate him. We are just getting started, I continued, ignoring his plea. Draft an eviction notice for this unit. Use the shell company, Harborline Residential Services. Give him the standard 30 days notice to vacate or agree to a new lease at 3 times the current market rate. 30 days, Miles repeated, his voice faint. And Miles, I added, leaning closer to the screen. Calculate the total amount of profits Lucas withdrew early from the Apollo Crest deals last quarter. The money he spent on this brunch, on his watches, on that girl. Reclassify those withdrawals as unauthorized management errors. Initiate a clawback procedure to recover those funds into a holding account. Miles took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Eleanor, listen to me. He is your son. If we do this, he will crash. He will have nothing. Are you sure you want to go this far? I looked at the empty spot on the rug where I had stood hours earlier, dripping with juice while his friends laughed. I remembered the boundaries he wanted. I remembered the look of absolute disdain in his eyes. He splashed juice on my face. Miles, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than a shout. He did it in front of a camera. He told me to pay rent like a normal person. Well, it is time he learns what it is like to lose everything in front of the lens of the real world. There was a long silence on the line. Then, Miles nodded slowly. Understood. I will execute the orders within the hour. I ended the call. I did not sit back and reflect. I pulled an old, battered suitcase from under the bed. It was the same one I used to take on long hauls with Jack. I packed 3 pairs of pants, a few sweaters, and my comfortable walking shoes. I left the jewelry. I left the expensive coats Lucas had bought me for photo ops. As I zipped the bag shut, I did not ask myself if I was being too harsh. I did not wonder if I should leave a note. The only question cycling through my mind was purely logistical. I needed to disappear. I needed to find a place on the map so small and insignificant that my son, with all his internet savvy, would never think to look for me there. Lucas woke up with a headache that felt like a drill boring into his skull. The sunlight streaming through the uncurtained windows was blinding, a sharp reminder of the champagne he had guzzled the day before. He reached for his phone on the nightstand, expecting to see notifications of likes and comments from the brunch livestream. Instead, the first thing he saw was an email from a sender named Harborline Residential Services. The subject line read, Notice of Lease Non-Renewal. He squinted, rubbing his eyes. The email was curt. It stated that his tenancy at the penthouse would terminate in 30 days. If he wished to stay, he could sign a new agreement. but the rent would increase to nearly 3 times the current rate, a figure that made his stomach turn. "This is ridiculous," Lucas muttered, dialing the support number listed at the bottom of the email. "Harbour Line Residential. How can I help you?" A bored voice answered. "This is Lucas Hayes," he said, injecting his usual authority into his voice. "I just received a glitch email about my apartment. I need you to fix it. I am a priority tenant." "1 moment," the voice said. After 10 seconds of silence, the operator returned. "There is no mistake. Mr. Hayes, the owner has exercised their right to restructure the lease. You have 30 days to vacate or secure the new rate." "Who is the owner?" Lucas demanded. "Put them on the phone." "Owner information is confidential," the operator said, and then the line went dead. Lucas stared at the phone. He had never been hung up on in his life. Needing to shake off the unease, he threw on some clothes and signaled Harper to come get coffee with him. The coffee shop downstairs was crowded. When they reached the front of the line, Lucas ordered 2 large lattes and tapped his black card against the reader with a practiced flick of his wrist. A harsh beep sounded. The screen flashed, declined. He frowned and tapped it again. Declined. "Sir," the barista said, looking at the growing line behind them. "Do you have another card?" Lucas felt the heat rise up his neck. "There is plenty of money on there." He snapped. "Your machine is broken." "Try another one, babe," Harper said, her voice tight. "People are staring." He pulled out his backup gold card. Declined. He eventually had to use a debit card attached to his small personal savings account just to pay for 2 coffees. Harper refused to make eye contact with him as they walked out. Things only got worse. When they walked toward the parking garage, a tow truck was already hoisting the back end of his Porsche into the air. "Hey!" Lucas shouted, running toward them. "Hey, put that down. That is my car." The driver did not even look up as he secured the chains. "Corporate asset recall. Order came in this morning." "I own that car," Lucas yelled. "Paperwork says it belongs to Northbridge Haven Group," the driver said, climbing into the cab. "Take it up with them." Lucas stood there, coffee cup crushing in his hand, as his status symbol was dragged away onto the street. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a priority email from Apollo Crest Capital. He opened it and felt the blood drain from his face. The Risk Management Committee had launched a formal investigation into 3 of his recent high-stakes investments. The email noted that the external collateral that usually secured his positions had been withdrawn overnight. Without that safety net, his brilliant deals looked like reckless gambling. His phone began to ring. It was a partner from the firm, then a client, then another. He let them all go to voicemail, his hands shaking. Harper was scrolling through her phone beside him. Suddenly, she stopped. "You are broke," she said. It was not a question. "It is just a banking error," Lucas stammered. "I will fix it." "You are toxic," she said, backing away. "And your mom is crazy. I am not dealing with this drama." An hour later, a notification popped up on his screen. Harper had posted a video titled "Breaking Up with a Toxic Man and His Toxic Family." It was already viral. Panic finally set in. Real, cold panic. Lucas ran back to the penthouse and sprinted to the guest room where his mother stayed. "Mom!" he shouted, throwing the door open. "Mom, pick up the phone." The room was empty. The bed was stripped. The closet door stood open, revealing nothing but empty hangers. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number again. "The number you have reached is no longer in service," the automated voice said. He tried to send a text, but it failed to deliver. He tried WhatsApp, but her profile photo was gone. He looked around the room, desperate for a clue, for a note, for anything. There was nothing. The only thing left in the room was a faint, sticky smell on the carpet near the door, the smell of dried orange juice. By the end of the week, the reality had settled in like a heavy fog. Lucas sat on the floor of the living room he had to vacate in 3 weeks. He checked his bank app. He had $4,000 to his name, the millions he thought he had access to, the cars, the house, the career. It had all evaporated. It was as if a giant, invisible hand had simply wiped him off the board. I took the night bus out of Los Angeles. I avoided the airport because airports leave paper trails, and I needed to be a ghost. I arrived in a small coastal town in Oregon called Driftwood Bay, a place where the fog rolls in thick and stays until noon. Northbridge Haven had quietly acquired an abandoned lumber mill here years ago, a forgotten asset in a portfolio of billions. I rented a small, weathered cabin overlooking the grey ocean. To the landlord, I was not Eleanor Hayes, the silent matriarch of a financial empire. I was just Nora, a widow looking for a quiet place to live out her remaining years. I paid for 6 months of rent in cash, pulled from the stash I had carried in my suitcase. Every morning, I walked along the freezing beach. The wind here was sharp, biting at my exposed skin. It reminded me of the days back in Ohio when I used to help Jack load the trucks at 4 in the morning. My body used to ache then, a deep physical exhaustion that settled into my bones. But this pain was different. This was a hollow ache in my chest, a spiritual fatigue from pushing my own son off a cliff. I started frequenting a small diner in town. I befriended a group of women who worked at the local supermarket and the dive bar down the street. They were tough women with lined faces and rough hands. One morning, a woman named Betty was crying over her eggs. He took my credit card again. Betty sobbed, wiping her eyes with a paper napkin. My son. He said it was for an emergency, but I saw the bill. It was for a gaming console. I don't know how to say no to him. I sipped my black coffee, listening to the chorus of agreement from the other women. They told stories of grown children who treated them like ATMs, of disrespect buried under the guise of family obligation. Their stories hardened my heart. I was not being cruel. I was cutting out a tumor before it killed the host. One rainy Wednesday evening, I sat in the back of a small wooden church. The pastor was a young man with a soft voice. He spoke about love, but not the unconditional kind the world likes to preach. He spoke about boundaries. Love without limits is not love, he said. It is just enabling. Sometimes you have to let the people you love fall, so they can learn how to stand up. I closed my eyes. I saw the orange juice dripping onto my lap. I realized that my silence over the last 30 years, my desire to shield Lucas from every hardship I had suffered, had turned him into a monster. I had created the man who humiliated me. Despite my resolve, I could not cut the cord completely. Late at night, in the privacy of my cabin, I opened my laptop and accessed the encrypted reports Miles sent me, my heart squeezed tight in my chest. There were paparazzi photos of Lucas arguing with his landlord. There was a grainy shot of him hauling cardboard boxes out of the penthouse, looking sweaty and desperate. One night, seeing a report that his credit card debt was spiraling. My finger hovered over the keyboard. I logged into an anonymous account. I typed in the numbers to pay off a $500 debt he owed to a utility company. I was about to hit enter. No. No. Eleanor. I whispered to the empty room. Do not do it. I deleted the numbers. I closed the tab. If I saved him now, even a little bit, the lesson would be lost. He had to feel the cold. He had to feel the fear. To keep myself sane, I started volunteering at a local workers' support center. I used the skills that had built a billion-dollar portfolio to teach minimum wage workers how to manage their paychecks. I showed a young, single mother how to budget for groceries so her lights would not get cut off. For the first time in years, my knowledge felt real. It was not just moving numbers on a screen. It was survival. Tonight, a storm is hammering the coast. The waves are crashing against the cliffs with a violence that shakes the floorboards of my cabin. I am sitting by the window, watching the rain lash against the glass. I have typed a text message to Lucas. It sits there on my screen, glowing in the dark. When you actually understand the value of money, I will appear. I stare at it for a long time. My thumb hovers over the send button. I want to send it. I want him to know I am watching. But I take a deep breath and delete the words, one by one, until the screen is blank again. The silence returns, heavier than the storm outside. The fall from the penthouse was not a graceful slide. It was a jagged, brutal crash. Within 2 weeks, Lucas had been forced out of the motel on the edge of the city because his credit card declined for the 3rd night in a row. He found himself in a cramped 3-bedroom apartment in a bad part of town, sharing a bathroom with 2 complete strangers he found on an app. One was a DJ who practiced at 4 in the morning, and the other was a silent man who hoarded canned tuna. Lucas spent his days in coffee shops that did not require a purchase to sit, frantically refreshing his email. The response from Apollo Crest Capital had been final and public. They terminated his contract, citing conduct detrimental to the firm's reputation. When he applied to rival funds, the rejections were swift. The articles about him, the juice splash billionaire, were the first thing that popped up on Google. In the past, these stories would have vanished, buried under a wave of positive PR paid for by an anonymous source. Now, without Eleanor's money to scrub the internet, every embarrassing detail remained stuck to his digital footprint like tar. We need a retainer of $10,000 to proceed with your defense, a lawyer told him over the phone regarding the investor lawsuits. 10,000. Lucas gripped the phone, sweating. I can give you 2,000 now, please. I am good for it. Call us when you have the full amount, Mr. Hayes, the lawyer said, and the line went dead. By the end of the month, his bank account was showing double digits. Desperation made him click on a job listing he would have mocked a month ago. An email arrived shortly after from a company called Driftwood Transit Solutions, based in Northern California. The position was night shift operations supervisor. The pay was barely enough to cover rent and food, and the requirements listed basic data entry and physical stamina. Lucas laughed bitterly. A supervisor at a warehouse, me. But when his landlord banged on the door demanding the rent, Lucas typed out a humbling reply, accepting the offer. He packed his remaining clothes into a duffel bag and took a Greyhound bus north, completely unaware that Driftwood Transit was a 3rd-tier subsidiary of a holding company owned by Northbridge Haven, 300 miles away in Oregon. Eleanor Hayes sat in her cabin with a mug of tea. Her laptop pinged. It was an encrypted email from Miles. Subject: Asset acquisition confirmed. Body: The candidate has accepted the position at the Stockton facility. Start date is tomorrow. Eleanor opened a digital map. She traced the line from her cabin in Driftwood Bay down to the warehouse near Stockton. He was closer now. She could almost feel the gravity of his presence on the coast. She typed a reply to Miles, her fingers moving slowly but deliberately. Protocol remains absolute. No one at the site is to know his identity. He is just another hire. I want weekly reports on his performance sent directly to this secure server. No special treatment. 2 nights later. Lucas stood in the middle of a cavernous warehouse that smelled of diesel and sawdust. The noise was deafening. Forklifts beeped incessantly, and the sound of heavy pallets hitting concrete echoed off the metal walls. "You new guy," a voice roared. Lucas turned to see a man who looked like he was carved out of granite. He was in his 60s, with skin like leather and hands the size of shovels. This was Ramon, the floor manager. Ramon had driven trucks for Road River Freight 30 years ago, back when Jack Hayes was alive. But he had never met the son. To him, Lucas was just another soft city boy trying to survive the night shift. I am the new supervisor," Lucas stammered, adjusting his safety vest. "Supervisor." Ramon spat on the ground. "You are a clipboard holder until you prove otherwise. Grab that pallet jack. Lane 4 is backed up." "That is not really in my job description." Lucas started to say, "I am here to manage the—" "I said move the pallet," Ramon shouted, stepping into Lucas's personal space. "We do not have people who just stand around here. You work or you walk." Lucas swallowed his pride. He grabbed the handle of the heavy jack and pulled. It was heavier than any weight he had ever lifted at his boutique gym. His muscles burned. Sweat stung his eyes. Later that night, exhausted and aching, Lucas leaned against a stack of crates and pulled out his phone to check Instagram out of habit. "Hey!" The shout made him jump. Ramon was marching toward him again. "Get off the phone!" Ramon barked. "This is not a social club. We have drivers waiting on these loads. You check that screen one more time on the clock, and I will fire you myself. Do you understand?" Yes. "Yes, sir," Lucas said, his voice trembling. At 3 a.m, Lucas sat alone in the break room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The room smelled of old grease and stale coffee. He looked at his hands. They were dirty, and a blister was forming on his thumb. He stared at the vending machine, at the cheap coffee in the styrofoam cup. Suddenly, a memory washed over him. He remembered his mother, years ago, sitting at the kitchen table late at night. She always had grease stains on her fingers and the smell of diesel in her hair. She would be hunched over invoices, drinking bad coffee just like this. "She did this," Lucas whispered to the empty room. "She did this every single day." He had always thought the money just appeared. He thought she was just a frantic, tired woman who didn't understand his sophisticated world. But sitting here, with his back aching and his ego shattered, he realized for the first time that the empire he had lived off was built on nights exactly like this one. "Did I ever say thank you?" he asked himself, his voice cracking. I don't think I ever did." The rhythm of the night shift eventually seeped into Lucas's bones, replacing the adrenaline of the stock market with the dull, aching thrum of physical labor. After 6 weeks, he stopped waking up every hour during the day. He began to sleep the deep, dreamless sleep of the exhausted. His hands, once manicured and soft, were now rough, with calluses forming along the ridges of his palms where the pallet jack handle rubbed against his skin. During the 3 a.m. lunch break, Lucas usually sat with Marisol, a single mother with tired eyes who worked 2 jobs to keep her son in a special needs school. She ate her sandwich quickly, always checking her phone for updates from the night nurse. My ex. He just took off, Marisol told him one night, her voice flat. He said the pressure was too much. Can you imagine leaving your own family because you wanted to buy a new truck and live free? Lucas stared at his cold pasta. The shame hit him in the gut, harder than any hunger pang. He thought of Eleanor sitting in the penthouse, asking for help, and him worrying about his reputation. Yeah, Lucas whispered, looking down. Some people are just selfish. They think the world revolves around their comfort. Exactly. Marisol nodded. But we keep going. Right. For the ones who stayed. Across the table, a group of forklift drivers were laughing. They were talking about the ghost owner of Driftwood Transit. I heard she used to drive the routes herself, one driver said, gesturing with a plastic fork. Back in the 80s, they say she could change a tire in the snow faster than any man on the crew. She still checks the logs. You know. Nothing gets past the old lady. Lucas chuckled softly, shaking his head. It is just a corporate myth, he said. Owners do not check logs. They check profit margins from a golf course. He had no idea that the myth was the woman he had evicted, and that she was currently checking his logs from a cabin 300 miles away. Later that night, Ramon called Lucas into the small glass office on the warehouse floor. The old manager threw a clipboard onto the metal desk. You changed the inventory count on aisle 4, Ramon said, his voice low and dangerous. I just rounded up, Lucas explained, leaning back against the doorframe, falling into his old habits. The discrepancy was less than 0.5%. In finance, we call that immaterial. It makes the report look cleaner for corporate. Ramon stood up. He did not look impressed. This is not Wall Street, kid. We do not make things look pretty here. If the count is off, it means a pallet is missing or placed wrong. If a pallet is placed wrong, it falls. If it falls, it kills someone. Lucas straightened up, the smirk vanishing from his face. We need the truth, Ramon said, poking a finger into Lucas's chest. Not your version of it. Do not ever lie to make a number look good again. The lesson stung, but it stuck. Lucas stopped trying to massage the data. He started hunting down the errors, climbing the racking himself to verify serial numbers. When he finally submitted a report that was 100% accurate, even if it showed a loss, he felt a strange sense of pride he had never felt closing $1 million deal. This was real. He was actually solving a problem, not just moving debt around. In Oregon, Eleanor Hayes sat by her fireplace, a stack of printed emails on her lap. The early reports from Ramon were brutal. It is late. Subject complains about dust. Subject hides in the bathroom. But as she flipped through the pages, the tone shifted. Subject stayed 2 hours overtime to help fix the conveyor belt. Subject identified a shipping error that saved us $5,000. She traced the words with her finger. She closed her eyes and tried to picture him. Not the boy in the suit holding a champagne glass, but a man in a safety vest, hair messy, sweat on his neck, arguing about inventory counts Then she reached the final report in the stack. It was a flagged note from the HR system regarding a payroll deduction. Incident report. Employee Marisol Garcia requested an advance for emergency medication for her child. Request denied due to policy. Lucas Hayes intervened. He transferred his entire monthly safety bonus $200 directly to her account. He requested anonymity. Eleanor read the paragraph 3 times. Her hand trembled. $200? To the old Lucas. That was the tip he left for a bad waiter. To this Lucas, it was his grocery money for 2 weeks. A tear leaked out, hot and fast, tracking through the wrinkles on her cheek. She let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for months. He gave it away, she whispered to the empty cabin. He actually gave it away. She looked at the phone on the table. She wanted to call him. She wanted to tell him she was proud, that he was finally becoming the man Jack would have loved. But she pulled her hand back. Not yet, she told herself, wiping her face. Is the lesson deep enough? Or is he just reacting to the pressure if I save him now? Will he revert the moment the money returns? She filed the report away in the folder, her heart aching with a mix of fierce pride and terrible guilt. She would wait. She had to be sure that the rot was gone, down to the very last root. The fragile peace Lucas had built at the warehouse shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. A process server cornered him by the loading dock, handing him a thick envelope that felt heavier than the pallets he moved all night. It was a lawsuit. A group of investors from his Apollo Crest days had grown tired of waiting for explanations. They were suing him personally for gross negligence and misrepresentation. The damages they sought amounted to $3 million, a sum so large it made his knees buckle. Lucas sat in the office of a court-appointed lawyer the next morning. The room smelled of stale paper and cheap coffee. The lawyer, an overworked man with coffee stains on his tie, threw the file onto the desk. "You have 2 roads here, Mr. Hayes," the lawyer said bluntly. "Road 1 is bankruptcy. You declare it. We drag this out for 5 years, and your credit is dead for 10. Road 2 is a settlement. You admit fault. You agree to a payment plan that will garnish 20% of your wages for the foreseeable future, and you avoid a fraud trial. But you will be living on scraps." That night, Lucas went to work, looking like a ghost. Ramon found him staring at the forklift keys, his hands trembling. "Every man gets cornered eventually, kid," Ramon said, his voice rough but steady. "You have 2 choices. You run, or you stand still and take the punch. Standing still hurts like hell right now. It might knock teeth out. But running keeps you looking over your shoulder until your neck breaks. Taking the punch is the only way to stop the fight." At 3 a.m, Lucas stood in front of the humming vending machine. The break room was empty. He pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over his mother's old number. He knew it was disconnected, yet the urge to hear her voice was a physical pain. He typed a message. "If you can see this, I need." He stared at the words. He remembered the orange juice dripping from her chin. He remembered telling her to pay rent. I have no right to ask her anymore," he whispered to the buzzing lights. He deleted the draft, character by character, until the screen was blank. The next day, he made his choice. He walked into a pawn shop downtown and unclasped the Patek Philippe from his wrist. It was the only thing of value he had left. A 30th birthday gift from Eleanor that he had once treated as just another prop for his rich persona. The engraving on the back read, "For my son, who builds his own way." "It is worth $50,000, Lucas said, his voice tight. "I will give you 12,000, the broker replied without looking up. "Done?" Lucas said. He took the cash. It was the down payment for his settlement, the first step in a decade of debt, 300 miles away. Eleanor's phone rang. It was her lawyer. "Eleanor, we received a notification," the lawyer said. "The umbrella policy covering Lucas's professional liability, it is currently dormant. If we activate it, we can crush this lawsuit in 48 hours. Do you want to intervene?" Eleanor stood by the window of her cabin. Her hands were shaking so hard she had to grip the sill to keep from falling. She imagined Lucas alone, terrified, facing a judge without a shield. "No," she said, her voice cracking. "Do not intervene. Let the system work." She walked the beach that night, the wind whipping her face. She screamed into the roaring ocean, a sound no one heard. She wondered if she was a teacher or a monster. Was she saving him, or was she crushing him beneath the wheels of the law the day of the hearing arrived? The courtroom was cold. Lucas stood before the judge in a suit he had bought at a thrift store. "Mr. Hayes," the judge said, "do you attribute these losses to market volatility?" Lucas looked at the investors sitting in the front row. He took a deep breath. "No, Your Honor," Lucas said clearly. I was arrogant. I took risks with money that was not mine because I thought I was untouchable. I am solely responsible." In the back row, a woman in a grey wool coat and a hat pulled low sat perfectly still. Tears streamed silently down her face into her scarf. Eleanor Hayes watched her son stand tall for the first time in his life, not by climbing on her shoulders, but by carrying his own burden. As the judge slammed the gavel down to finalize the debt agreement, Eleanor slipped out the back door, vanishing before Lucas turned around to scan the room for a ghost that was not there. 1 year bled into 2. The sharp sting of the warehouse air became a familiar comfort rather than a punishment. Lucas Hayes was no longer the temporary night shift supervisor. He was now the assistant warehouse manager. The promotion came with a small raise, most of which went immediately to the garnishment order on his paycheck. The mountains of debt were still there, but they were eroding, dollar by dollar. The investors who had once threatened to ruin him now sent rare, terse emails thanking him for consistent payments. They respected that he had stayed to pay the bill instead of fleeing to another country. He moved out of the shared apartment and found a studio 3 blocks from the distribution center. It was small, smelling of lemon cleaner and old carpet. But it was his. On a Friday night, instead of popping bottles at a club, Lucas sat on the floor with a screwdriver, assembling a cheap bookshelf he had bought at a discount store. He turned the screw, feeling the wood tighten against the metal. It was a simple physical act, but it felt more permanent than any stock trade he had ever made. He was building something real. His dinners were simple stews made in a slow cooker. He stopped looking at the window displays of luxury brands. When his boots wore out, he bought a sturdy pair of work boots, prioritizing ankle support over the logo. His Instagram, once a shrine to excess, had been dormant for months. He posted only once that year a picture of the sun setting over the concrete loading dock with the caption, "Work is done." One rainy night after a double shift. Lucas sat at his small kitchen table. The silence of the apartment was heavy. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and a cheap ballpoint pen. He did not know why, but he needed to get the words out of his head. He began to write. He wrote about the brunch. He wrote about the orange juice. He wrote about the look in Eleanor's eyes that he had been too blind to see. "I never asked you how you were," he wrote, the pen digging into the paper. "I only asked what you could give me. When I splashed that juice on you, I thought I was setting a boundary. I realize now I was just cutting my own lifeline. If I ever saw you again, Mum, I would not ask for a cent. I would just want to tell you that I was wrong." He stared at the page for a long time. He did not fold it. He did not put it in an envelope. He knew he had no address to send it to. Instead, out of habit, he pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of the handwritten page to save it. He put the phone down and went to sleep, unaware that the device was still logged into an old, shared cloud account from 5 years ago, an account he thought was dead, but one that Eleanor still monitored. In the cabin in Oregon, Eleanor was going through her digital archives, preparing to close down another set of shell emails. She clicked on the Family Shared folder, expecting it to be empty. A new file appeared, IMG 4902.jpg. She clicked it. The image loaded slowly on the rural internet connection. It was a photo of a yellow legal pad covered in messy handwriting. Eleanor adjusted her glasses. She read the first line, then the second. By the time she reached the bottom, her hand was shaking so violently she had to set her mug of tea down on the desk to keep from spilling it. There was no mention of trust funds. There was no demand for a lawyer. There was just the word "Mom," written with a raw, agonizing honesty. It was not the letter of a creditor asking for payment. It was the confession of a son who finally understood the cost of his soul. Eleanor sat back in her chair. The sound of the ocean outside seemed to quiet down. She picked up her phone and dialed Miles. "It is time," she said, her voice firm. "End the game. Miles, I want you to arrange a meeting for Lucas Hayes at the Northbridge Haven headquarters in San Francisco. Tell him it is a final interview for a regional director position." "Are you sure, Eleanor?" Miles asked. "Is he ready?" "He is ready," she replied. 2 days later. Eleanor stood in front of the mirror in her cabin. She looked different than the woman who had fled Los Angeles. Her hair was grayer, and there were new lines around her eyes, but her shoulders were squared. She looked at the 2 folders lying on her bed. One contained a contract promoting Lucas to a high-ranking executive role within the family empire. The other contained a personal letter explaining why she could never see him again. She ran her hand over the covers of the folders. She picked them both up and placed them in her bag. She did not know which one she would give him. That decision could only be made when she looked into his eyes and saw if the man who wrote that letter was the same man standing in the room. Lucas Hayes walked into the glass tower of Northbridge Haven in San Francisco wearing a button-down shirt he had ironed himself that morning. It was a cheap shirt, bought from a discount rack, but it was crisp. He was there for an interview for the regional manager position at Driftwood Transit. He wiped his sweaty palms on his slacks, took a deep breath, and stepped into the elevator. When the doors opened on the top floor, a secretary guided him not to an HR office, but to the main boardroom. The room was vast, with a view of the Golden Gate Bridge that cost millions of dollars. At the far end of a mahogany table sat a single figure. She was turned toward the window, wearing a sharp, dark suit. Behind her, frosted onto the glass wall, was the Northbridge Haven logo. "Please, sit down," the woman said. Lucas froze. He knew that voice. The chair swiveled around. Eleanor Hayes looked at him, her face unreadable. her posture commanding. "Mum," Lucas whispered. "What? What are you doing here?" "I am the chairman of Northbridge Haven Group," Eleanor said, her voice cool and professional. "I own Driftwood Transit. I own the penthouse you used to live in. And until recently, I owned the majority share of Apollo Crest Capital." Lucas stood there, his mind reeling. The shock quickly turned into a hot, blinding rage. "You own it!" Lucas shouted, his voice echoing off the soundproof glass. "You pretended to be poor. You stood by and watched me get torn apart. I was sleeping in a motel. I was humiliated. You took my money and let me rot while you sat in a castle." "It was never your money?" Eleanor replied calmly, not flinching at his volume. "I paid off your credit card debt 7 times in 4 years. I covered the losses on your first 3 bad investments so you would not get fired. I cleaned up your messes while you treated me like a servant in my own house." "I was your son," Lucas yelled, slamming his hand on the table. "And that is why I had to stop saving you," Eleanor said. Her voice cracked slightly, but she regained control instantly. "Remember the brunch, Lucas. Remember the orange juice. You told me that if I wanted to stay, I had to pay rent. You told me to learn my place." Lucas went silent. The memory hit him like a physical blow. He remembered the laughter of his friends. He remembered the juice dripping off her chin. He remembered the cruelty in his own voice. He sank into the chair opposite her, the anger draining away, replaced by a crushing shame. I said that," Lucas whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "I really said that." Eleanor reached into her briefcase. She slid 2 folders across the polished table. "Folder A," she said, pointing to the left. "This is a contract for the Director of Logistics and Community Housing. It is a hard job. The pay is fair, but not excessive. There is a clause that requires you to donate 10% of your bonuses to a housing fund for the poor. You get no family privileges. You earn every cent." She pointed to the second folder. "Folder B is a release form. If you sign this, I will pay off your remaining legal debts. I will give you a lump sum of $200,000 to start over. But in exchange, you agree to leave my life. You disappear. I will not be your mother, and you will not be my son." Lucas looked at the 2 folders. He looked at the release form that offered him a clean slate. He reached out and pushed it away. "I do not want anyone to pay my debts," Lucas said, his voice shaking. "I earned that debt. I will pay it. I just want a chance to work. I want to be useful. I do not care if it is in your company or at the warehouse." Eleanor stared at him for a long moment. Then, she reached out and took the release form. She ripped it in half. She pulled a third, thinner document from her bag and placed it on top of the job contract. "There is one non-negotiable condition added to the job offer," Eleanor said softly. Lucas leaned in to read it. "Clause 4B. The employee is required to attend dinner with the chairman at least 2 times a month. Discussion of business matters is strictly prohibited during these hours." Lucas looked up. His vision blurred. He picked up the pen. They both signed the papers in silence, the scratching of the pen the only sound in the room. When it was done, Lucas stood up. He felt lighter, yet heavier, than he had ever felt. He hesitated at the door, his hand on the handle. "Can I?" Lucas stammered. "Can I still call you Mom? Or do I have to call you Chairman?" Eleanor stood up and smoothed her jacket. She looked at him with a gaze that held both forgiveness and a warning. Outside of this room, you can call me Eleanor, or Chairman, or whatever you like, she said. But when it is just the two of us, if you can say the word Mom without feeling shame, then we have both done something right. The door opened. The bright light from the hallway flooded in, washing over them both, closing the chapter on revenge and opening the first blank page of redemption. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Lucas's journey. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit the like button, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.